Hey there, come a little closer to the fire with me. Let the room stay dim, the candles steady, the world outside politely distant. Tonight I want to take you somewhere that looks quiet from the surface and feels even quieter once you step beneath it. A place under sand and stone where a king lies still, and the walls themselves speak in rows so dense they look like rain frozen in midair. A place where dangerous animals were carved on purpose with missing teeth, broken backs, or half a body, as if the act of writing could tame what it named. A place where the afterlife was once treated like a royal secret, locked away for one person alone, until history cracked and the secret began to leak into ordinary hands. If that kind of story is the sort you like to fall asleep to, go ahead and like and subscribe. It helps these long nights find the people who need them. Now, take a slow breath in through your nose and let it go as if you are fogging a window. Feel your jaw soften. Let your tongue rest. If you were standing here with me, I would point to the smallest details first. The tiny tremble in a candle flame, the way a log shifts and settles with a soft complaint, the slow rise and fall of your chest as you remember there is nothing you have to do right now. Just listen and drift. Deep beneath the sands of Saqqara, there is a kind of silence that feels older than silence. It is not the silence of an empty room, where you can still sense a door and a hallway, and the possibility of footsteps. It is the silence of sealed stone, the hush of limestone pressed close on every side, the patient quiet of a place that has waited through thousands of summers without expecting anyone to return. In 1881, a man named Gaston Maspero moved through that hush with a torch in his hand. You can imagine the light first, how it would have wavered, how it would have licked at the rough surfaces and made the smallest grains of dust glow like tiny drifting stars. There is something intimate about torchlight. It does not flood a chamber. It touches. It chooses a corner, then another. And in that choosing, it creates the feeling that you are being led by the flame, not the other way around. Maspero was a French archaeologist, and he had seen tombs before. He knew the ordinary language of ancient walls, names, titles, scenes of offerings, a procession of symbols meant to honor the dead and instruct the living. But when his torch reached the inner walls of the Pyramid of Unas, the last pharaoh of Egypt's 5th dynasty, what met him was not ordinary. It was as if the stone had been covered in a long whisper, repeated so many times it became a texture, columns upon columns of hieroglyphs, every available surface. Not decoration, not a story of battles or treaties, something stranger, something that felt like a tool. Honestly, I have always found it strange, the moment when a tool becomes sacred. A knife can cut bread, and it can cut bonds, and it can carve a sign into stone that is meant to guide a soul through darkness. It is the same object, and yet it is not the same at all. Once people agree that it holds power, these inscriptions were spells. Modern scholars call them the Pyramid Texts, but that name is tidy in a way the experience is not. Standing there, you would not think, ah yes, an early corpus of religious literature. You would think, if you are honest with yourself, that you have stepped into a room built from language, that the walls are not walls, but instructions, warnings, doors, a permanent magical arsenal made for a dead king. The Pyramid of Unas was built around 2375 to 2345 BC, give or take, depending on which chronologies you trust. That is a long time to sit inside the earth, holding your breath. Before this, Egyptian priests carried their death words in memory, and on papyrus that could soften, tear, fade, vanish. The spoken word lived on tongues. The written word lived on plants. Unas changed the balance. He took what had been fleeting and pressed it into stone, as if he could pin eternity in place. On the walls of his burial chamber, there were 283 distinct spells, each one carved with careful hands. I like to think of those hands sometimes. Not because it makes the story brighter, but because it makes it human. Someone stood in narrow corridors where the air was stale and the light was thin, working by lamplight, day after day, carving lines and curves and tiny details that had to be right, because in their world, a wrong sign was not just a typo. It could be a hole in a shield. If you trace the thought behind it, you begin to see what the old kingdom believed about death, not simply that it happened, but that it was a passage full of hazards and negotiations, and the one person who could not be allowed to fail was the Pharaoh. In that society, the Pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the force of divine order made flesh. He was the hinge that held the cosmos in alignment. So when he died, it was not only a family loss or a political transition, it was a cosmic crisis. The universe itself, in their imagination, could wobble, and if the universe could wobble, then words had to be placed like stones in a wall, each one fitted, each one doing its part. The texts were positioned with intention. Some were close to the sarcophagus, like a hand hovering near a sleeping heart. Others were placed along the walls leading in, as if the corridors needed to be lined with protection, the way you might line a doorway with light if you were afraid of what might enter. There were spells in the antechamber, where the body would first rest, and spells deeper in the burial chamber, where the king's stillness would settle for the longest time. Each placement mattered, creating invisible barriers against hostile forces the Egyptians imagined as hungry, curious, easily offended, and the spells did not speak of death as an ending. They spoke of death as a transformation, as ordinary as changing clothes, and as difficult as becoming a star. The king's body was treated like a temporary vessel, something that could be set aside, eventually, without losing what truly mattered. What mattered was the essence, the ka, the ba, the ach, words that do not map perfectly onto our own language, which is why scholars still argue and adjust and sigh. But the feeling behind them is clear. A person is not one thing. A person is a bundle of powers and memories, a breath and a name and a shadow, a spark that can move, and each part must be guided, protected, persuaded into its new life. So the pyramid texts became an instruction manual and an insurance policy at once. They told the dead king what to say, where to go, how to become what he needed to become. They also told the universe what to do with him. They commanded. They did not ask politely. The tone is one of certainty, as if the proper words can make the sky open, as if a sentence can make a ladder appear. There is something soothing in that certainty, even when it is dark. You know that feeling when you are afraid, and then someone you trust speaks calmly, as if the outcome is already handled? That is the voice these spells try to become. A calm voice in a dangerous place. And still, even in their confidence, you can sense the fear underneath. Because why carve so many spells if the passage is easy? Why turn a pyramid into a chamber of writing if writing is unnecessary? No, the Egyptians did this because they believed the unseen world had teeth, not always literal teeth. Sometimes the teeth were forgetfulness. Sometimes the teeth were misdirection. Sometimes the teeth were the simple fact that chaos does not sleep. As Maspero's torch moved, those carved lines would have caught the light and thrown it back in tiny shadows. The hieroglyphs would have looked alive for a moment, as if they were moving, and maybe, for a second, he felt what the ancient craftsman felt, that he was standing inside a machine made of language, waiting patiently for a king to wake. Stay with me a little longer. Let the fire crackle softly. Let the dust in the air settle, because in the next part, we will step closer to the spells themselves and the strange, gentle logic of how a soul was expected to change from body to star to sunlight to the quiet green kingdom of Osiris. If you were standing here with me, we would take a few slow steps along the chamber wall, not hurried steps, because even imagining hurry feels too loud in a room like this. We would let the soles of our shoes scrape softly, just enough to hear that powdery grit that gathers where no wind can reach. The air would taste faintly of stone, a dry mineral taste, and the torch would leave a thin ribbon of smoke that curls upward and disappears into darkness. And as we drift along the writing, you would notice something odd. Some signs. Look, wounded, a snake without a full body, a crocodile with its spine cut short, a dangerous creature pierced by a little knife that is itself only a picture, and yet it feels like a real blade, doing real work. This is not carelessness. It is deliberate, like a whisper spoken with teeth clenched. The Egyptians had a habit that scholars call execration. The idea was simple and a little unsettling. An image has power. A word has power. If you carve the image of a snake perfectly, then you have invited something snake-like into the space. So you remove the fangs, you break the sign, you bind the creature with carved ropes. You make it less capable of harm, not in the world outside the wall, but inside the invisible world that the wall is meant to touch. I find that thought both eerie because it suggests the universe listens closely, comforting because it suggests we are not helpless. We can edit the danger, we can soften it, we can take the sharpness out of a symbol and, by doing so, take a little sharpness out of fear. Picture the artisans again, their shoulders aching in a narrow passage, their fingers cramped around tools, their lamps fluttering. They are copying from papyrus templates, transferring each spell onto limestone as carefully as if they were laying threads into cloth. The stone is pale, but under torchlight it warms into honey. A line is carved, then another. The rhythm becomes almost like breathing. Carve, pause, carve, pause. Wipe away dust. Check the curve of a bird's beak, the angle of a reed leaf, the tiny dot that changes a sound, the small stroke that changes a meaning. Some nights the air would have been thick, the lamps sputtering while everyone held their breath, trying not to disturb the flame. In the rigid staircase of Old Kingdom society, the afterlife was arranged like everything else. The pharaoh at the top, shining, untouchable. Below him, nobles and officials and priests who served the palace, each with their own status and privileges, but none with the full arsenal. Below them, the people who built, baked, carried, planted, repaired, and endured. Most were buried in simpler tombs, mastabas with modest goods, a few amulets, maybe a prayer. Their names could be remembered by family, and then forgotten, and the sand would keep its own counsel. And yet the same fear lived in everyone, the same hope, the same wish that a soul might not wander lost, the same question, whispered into the dark, will anyone speak for me when I cannot speak? That is what makes this chamber feel so heavy with meaning, not only because of what it contains, but because of what it excludes. It is a room that says, with absolute confidence, this one must be saved. And by saying that, it implies that others might not be. There is a tenderness hidden inside that harshness, because the spells are not cold. They are filled with images of ascent, of reunion, of being recognized. They imagine the king taking his place among the imperishable stars, those stars that never sink, circling forever. They imagine him stepping onto the solar bark, the boat of the sun, joining the crew as if he has always belonged there. They imagine him becoming Osiris, entering the green stillness beneath the earth, not as a victim, but as a ruler of quiet. And if you listen carefully to the tone of those imaginations, you can hear the first shape of an idea that will later become huge. The idea that death is not a wall, it is a corridor. Long, yes. Complicated, yes. But not meaningless, not empty. For now, though, in this first sealed chamber, it is all for the king. The words cling to him, the way linen clings to a body wrapped for the long sleep. The air clings to him. The stone clings to him. Even the dust clings to him, settling in slow layers that feel like time made visible. Let your own thoughts loosen the way dust loosens when you stop touching it. Let the fire keep its gentle conversation. And when you are ready, we will open the next quiet door and follow the spells into their two great stories, the sun's journey and Osiris's shadowed return. The strange thing about a spell is that it can feel like a door and a map at the same time. You read it, or you speak it, and it tells you where you are going. But it also makes the going possible. That is what the walls around Unas were trying to do. They were not only describing an afterlife, they were building one. If you let your imagination soften, you can almost hear the chamber working. Not with gears, not with noise, with intention, with the low pressure of belief, like a river pressing against its banks in the dark, shaping the land without anyone watching. The pyramid texts speak of transformation in layers, and they do it the way dreams do it. One image dissolves into another. A man becomes a star becomes a flame becomes a name spoken by a god. And through all of it, the king is both himself and something more, slipping from one identity to the next, as if the afterlife requires a wardrobe change at every threshold. Some scholars argue over the exact meaning of the ka, the ba, the ak. It is debated, and every translator has their own quiet preferences. But even without perfect definitions, you can feel the purpose. The ka as the life force that needs offerings. The ba as the moving self, the personality that can travel. The ach as the transfigured state, effective and bright, a being that can endure. And the spells do not treat these as metaphors. They treat them as practical matters, like tools laid out on a table. You know that feeling when you are packing for a trip and you keep touching the same items, checking them, making sure nothing is forgotten? The pyramid texts have that same anxious tenderness. They keep returning to essentials: breath, name, direction, recognition, protection. They keep saying, in different ways, do not lose yourself. And then, as if to keep the mind from slipping, the texts anchor everything to two great stories that Egypt told itself for thousands of years. The first is the story of the sun. The second is the story of a murdered king. The sun god, Re, rises. He crosses the sky, he sinks, and at night he does not rest. He travels through the underworld in his solar bark, moving from the western horizon to the eastern dawn. Each night is a journey. Each dawn is a victory. Each morning is proof that the universe can be repaired again, even after it has been dragged into darkness. In the pyramid texts, Unas is invited into that cosmic routine, not as a passenger, as crew. Imagine it softly. A boat made of light, but not the harsh light of a lamp in your eyes. A warm gold light, like the edges of a candle flame when you stare at it too long, and it becomes gentle. The boat glides through night waters that are not exactly water. Sometimes they are darkness with a surface. Sometimes they are a slow-moving memory. Sometimes they are the very first waters of creation, still cool from the beginning of time. On that boat, there are gods with tired, eternal faces and spirits who have learned to work without panic. There are ropes that hum when they are touched. There is a mast that feels like a pillar holding up the sky. There is the sound of oars dipping into shadow, steady, patient, like breathing. The spells say the king must be accepted aboard. He must speak the right words. He must know how to present himself so the divine crew recognizes him as belonging. That recognition matters, because the night is full of things that do not want the sun to return, things that prefer the world undone. The Egyptians imagined a serpent of chaos, Apophis, coiled in the dark, a being of negation, of refusal, of the old silence before creation had shape. Each night, the solar bark must pass near him. Each night, the gods must fight, sometimes with spears of light, sometimes with words that bind, sometimes with the simple force of order holding its ground. This is not described as a bloody scene in the way modern stories might do it. It is described as a cosmic struggle, like thunder arguing with stone. The danger is real, but it stays slightly out of focus, the way danger does in a dream when your mind is trying to protect you. And Unas, if the spells work, is there in the boat, adding his power to the side that wants dawn. The second great story is quieter, and somehow more personal. It is the story of Osiris. Osiris was imagined as a good ruler, a king who brought order and abundance, and his brother Seth, jealous, restless, chaos, wearing a face, plotted against him. There are versions of the tale, and some details shift depending on the temple, the century, the storyteller, but the spine remains. A trap, a betrayal, a death that is not supposed to happen, a body broken apart and scattered, as if someone wanted to make resurrection impossible. Isis, Osiris's wife, searches. She gathers what she can. She speaks words that are older than fear. She performs a magic that feels like the first time anyone ever tried to refuse loss. And for a moment, she restores him enough to conceive Horus, enough to keep the line of order alive. Osiris cannot return to the land of the living, not fully. So he becomes ruler of the dead, not only because he has power, but because he understands what it means to be taken from light. The pyramid texts weave these two stories together in a way that still amazes me. The king is Re by day, and Osiris by night. He rises in the east, he sets in the west. He shines, he descends. He is both the sun's returning certainty and the underworld's patient authority. 2 cycles, 1 soul. And all of this is said with a voice that does not hesitate. Some spells sound like they are shouting, but you can read them in a whisper, and they still carry weight. They command the sky to tremble. They command the earth to open. They speak as if language can push reality the way a hand pushes a door. There is a kind of innocence in that, too. Not childish innocence, but the innocence of a culture that believed the universe was responsive, that it could be addressed, that it could be reasoned with, persuaded, threatened, soothed, that a sentence, spoken correctly, could become a bridge. This is why the writing itself mattered so much. The hieroglyphs were not merely symbols of sound, they were images, and images were alive. So the dangerous ones were altered, snakes cut short, crocodiles bound, teeth missing, like a lullaby sung over something sharp to keep it from waking. It makes you wonder about the scribes' private fears. Did they ever feel a shiver when they carved a serpent? Did they ever glance at the doorway behind them, listening for a sound that was only imagination? Or were they so practiced, so calm in their work, that the chamber felt like a workshop and not a threshold? We cannot be sure, but I like to picture at least one apprentice who paused, fingertips dusty, and whispered the spell under his breath, testing the rhythm, feeling the words settle into the stone. The act of carving was itself a ritual. Years of planning, teams of artisans, templates on papyrus, proofreading with stern eyes, because one mistake could mean the king's soul wandering without its map. And if the king wandered, the world might wander with him. That was the belief, not a casual belief, a structural one. And then, quietly, success became its own kind of trouble. Unas's pyramid set a precedent. His successors looked at those written walls and understood the advantage. Soon, other pyramids carried their own collections. Teti, Pepi, Merenra, Pepi again, each reign adding, adjusting, preserving a core and layering new spells like fresh plaster on old stone. By the end of the 6th dynasty, the corpus had grown to hundreds upon hundreds of spells, more than 700, a library made for eternity, a library that still, at least in theory, belonged to the royal dead alone. But Egypt is a long story of things that do not stay locked. Power shifts, floods change the riverbanks, dynasties weaken. And when the Old Kingdom collapsed around 2181 BC, it was not only politics that broke, it was confidence. Imagine the great pyramids in that moment, not as bright monuments, but as silent shapes under a harsh sky. Looters moving like insects in the dark, provincial leaders refusing the old obedience, people whispering that the Pharaoh, once divine order incarnate, could not keep his own tomb safe. If the gods could not protect the king's body, then what did that say about protection in general? In the first intermediate period, authority scattered like dry leaves. Local governors grew rich and stubborn, and those men, watching the old center fail, began to ask a question that feels almost inevitable. If the afterlife tools work, why should only one person have them? At first, the change was quiet, not announced, not celebrated. It began in rock-cut tombs in Middle Egypt, where ambitious officials commissioned coffins that glowed with writing. Wood turned into a portable chamber, painted hieroglyphs where there had once been bare planks, old royal spells adapted, names swapped, pronouns softened, divine certainty adjusted to fit a mortal throat. It is a strange kind of revolution, isn't it? Not a battle, a purchase, a commission, a scribe dipping a brush and writing a name that was not a king's. You can almost hear the sound of that brush, the small wet scratch against wood, the careful pause between signs, the smell of resin, the smell of fresh-cut timber, the way ink darkens as it dries, a coffin becoming a book, a body becoming a reader. And this is where our story wants to drift next, because once the words left the pyramid walls, they began to travel. They began to belong to people who were not born divine. They began to carry a new idea, gentle and terrifying at once, that every soul, not just a royal one, might be weighed, judged, protected, transformed, if they could afford the right words and learn how to speak them. So let the fire keep burning softly. Let your breathing stay slow. In the next part, we will step into those painted coffins, into the first democratized maps of the afterlife, and into the quiet beginning of moral judgment that would eventually ask every heart to balance itself against a feather. Picture a Middle Kingdom cemetery with me. A coffin rests on wooden supports while a scribe leans inside it, shoulders hunched, trying to fit his whole life into that narrow space. He writes on the inside of the lid, because the lid will become a sky. He writes on the floor, because the floor will become a map. He writes on the sides, because the sides will become borders between safety and whatever waits outside. And when the coffin is closed, the deceased will be sealed inside a room of words, just like Unas, only smaller, only made of wood, and meant for someone whose hands once did ordinary work. This is where the afterlife begins to look less like a palace and more like a landscape. The Coffin Texts start describing places in detail, not just the sky or the stars, but fields, canals, measurements, directions, the way a travel guide might try to keep you from getting lost. They speak of the fields of reeds, that shimmering ideal Egypt beyond death. Some texts say the fields measure a perfect square, 1,000 by 1,000 cubits, a geometry of comfort. They describe barley rising higher than a man's waist, wheat taller still, and water that never fails. They list ferrymen and gatekeepers as if names are tickets, as if knowing the right name is like carrying a lantern through fog. They teach the dead how to ask for bread that does not spoil, how to find the canal that leads to a safer shore, how to greet a god without sounding afraid. And in the middle of all these practical directions, another idea begins to stir, a moral idea. It does not arrive as a sermon, it arrives as a requirement. If a pharaoh is born divine, then his heart is assumed to be light. If a provincial governor is merely human, then the gods might ask questions. Not cruel questions, just questions that feel like bright light on a hidden stain. So the Coffin Texts begin to include denials and declarations. I have not done harm. I have not cheated. I have not stolen bread from the hungry. The phrases are early, scattered, not yet the grand formal list they will become later. But you can feel the direction changing. The afterlife is no longer only a matter of knowing the right spells. It is also a matter of being the kind of person whose heart can survive being looked at closely. When you sit with that thought long enough, it becomes very quiet, because it suggests that even the Egyptians, with all their magic, all their carved certainty, sensed something simple, that you cannot bribe the deepest truth, you can only meet it. So, very gently, let us keep following the words as they grow more portable, more personal, more widespread. From stone to wood, from wood to papyrus, from kings to common households, the path is slow, but it is steady, like footsteps in a museum corridor, softened by distance, guiding you onward. If you could step out of the pyramid's stone throat and into the open air of the Middle Kingdom, you might notice the first difference in the sound. Stone keeps echoes close. It makes every breath feel official. Wood is softer. It absorbs. It remembers in a quieter way. A coffin workshop does not feel like a temple, even when the men inside speak in hushed voices and wash their hands as if they are handling something that might bite. Picture a town near the river, not too large, but busy enough that you can smell sap, smoke, wet clay, and the faint sweetness of beer on the worker's breath. There is a yard where planks lie stacked like sleeping animals, their pale grain catching the sun. A carpenter runs his palm along a board, testing for knots, listening with his fingertips. A scribe waits nearby with a bundle of brushes wrapped in cloth, and a small palette where ink has been ground into smooth, dark puddles. He is not looking at the sky. He is looking at the inside of a coffin, as if it is a room he must furnish with invisible furniture. This is what the Coffin Texts became. Rooms built for ordinary bodies. Not truly ordinary, of course. The people who could afford this were still important, still wealthy, still ambitious. Governors, administrators, priests, merchants, military men with scars hidden under linen. But they were not kings. Their names did not carry automatic divinity. Their families wanted protection anyway. And after the old kingdom cracked, no one could pretend the old rules were unbreakable. So the words traveled. They left the pyramid walls and moved onto wood, painted in black and red, drawn carefully on panels that would later be closed and sealed. The coffin became a portable pyramid chamber, smaller, warmer, more intimate. And inside that wooden space, the afterlife began to look less like a royal highway and more like a complicated landscape that any soul might have to navigate. If you were standing here with me, we would lean over the coffin's rim and look down into it. The interior smells of fresh-cut timber and resin. The light falls in a rectangle, and the dust in that light seems to drift in slow spirals, like tiny thoughts that do not want to settle. Along the inner walls, the scribe has already started, a line of signs. Then another. He pauses often, not because he is lazy, but because every pause is a kind of listening. He checks the spacing, the order, the rhythm of the spell. He checks his own breath, too, because breath and writing feel connected in this work. Like, if you hold one too tight, the other becomes brittle. The earliest Coffin texts borrowed directly from the pyramid spells. You can almost see the moment of substitution. Where Unas once stood, now another name appears. Keti, Intef, a mayor from a provincial town whose sandals once carried dust from markets, not palace courts. The spell still says, in its old confident voice, that the deceased will rise, will be accepted, will shine. But the confidence is now borrowed, and the borrowing changes everything. A mortal is being dressed in royal language. A man who once counted grain is being told he can step onto the solar bark as if he belongs there. Some scholars argue this was a theological innovation. Others say it was a social necessity. We cannot be sure which came first, but the result is clear. Written magic became a kind of ladder, and more hands reached for it. As the Coffin Texts spread, they did something else, something almost tender. They began to map, not just in the sense of listing gods and spells, but in the sense of describing places as if the afterlife had corners you could get lost in, and landmarks you could recognize if fear did not close your eyes. The fields of reeds, the Sehet Aru, grew sharper in description. Earlier texts mentioned them like a promise. Now, the promise gained measurements. A perfect square, 1,000 by 1,000 cubits, edges imagined so clean they could be drawn, with a straight reed and steady hand. Canals flowed through it, fed by a celestial Nile that never failed. Barley rose 4 cubits high in the eastern plots, a soft wall of grain that would brush your sleeves as you walked. Wheat in the western section rose 7 cubits high, so tall it would hide your whole body, turning you into a moving hush. When I think about those numbers, I feel the Egyptian love of order. Even paradise must be organized. Even joy must be arranged into rectangles and measured, because the opposite of measurement is chaos, and chaos is what you are trying to avoid. The Coffin Texts name ferrymen, too. They give you names the way a friend gives you directions through a strange city. Say this name. Offer this phrase. Do not insult the one who holds the oar. Do not forget the title of the gate. If you do, the water might turn strange. The shore might move. The path might fold back on itself. And that is another thing the Coffin Texts introduce more clearly. The fear of looping. The fear of being turned around. The fear that the afterlife might not be a straight road, but a river delta, branching and rebranching, beautiful and confusing, full of channels that look alike until you realize one leads to light and one leads to hunger. So the texts become practical. They include spells for food and drink, because a mortal soul, unlike a royal one, is imagined as needing sustenance. They include spells for gaining admission to councils of gods, because a mortal cannot assume he will be welcomed. They include spells for not being pushed aside, for not being dismissed, for not being treated like a stranger in the very place he longs to belong. If you listen closely, you can hear a new tone, not the shouting certainty of the earliest pyramid spells, but a careful confidence, a practiced composure, a mortal learning to speak like a god without trembling. And then, quietly, moral judgment begins to gather itself. At first, it is just a few lines in a spell, a denial, a small list. I have not committed evil against men. I have not mistreated animals. I have not cheated in measurements. I have not gossiped about my superiors. It sounds almost domestic, doesn't it? The way morality becomes a series of daily choices, a series of small harms you either do or refuse to do. The Egyptians were not imagining abstract virtue in the way later philosophies might. They were imagining harmony. Do not disturb the social balance. Do not take what makes another person's life tilt. Do not add weight to your own heart, because in their thinking, the heart holds memory and intention. It is not only a pump, it is a record, a secret journal the gods can read. Coffin Texts began describing courtroom scenes too, though not yet in the grand theatrical form that would appear later. A hall, divine figures seated like officials. Thoth, the scribe god, watching and writing. A question asked, a soul answering with calm words. A verdict that is not a slap of a gavel, but a shifting of reality, a door opening or remaining closed. It is debated how widespread these ideas were at first. Some tombs include more of this moral language than others. Some regions seem to prefer practical spells for navigation and protection. Others lean into the idea of confession and testimony. But across the variations, the direction is the same. The afterlife is becoming less automatic, less inherited, more personal. And when something becomes personal, it becomes commercial. Workshops bloom. Scriptoriums in cemetery towns become busy like markets. Templates are kept in chests. A master scribe owns a small library of spell versions, copied and recopied until the papyrus edges soften. Apprentices grind ink, mix pigments, practice signs on scraps, their wrists aching, their minds full of rules. They learn to write in cramped spaces, around corners, under lids, between beams. They learn to correct each other, because an error is not just embarrassing, it is dangerous. I like to imagine the quality checks. A master scribe leaning close, lamp held low, eyes narrowed. He traces a line with a fingertip that leaves a faint smear of charcoal dust. He stops where a sign seems slightly off. He calls the apprentice over, not shouting, because shouting in a coffin workshop feels wrong. He taps the wood twice, a quiet reprimand. The apprentice fixes it, breath held, then released, as if he has just tightened a knot on a rope that will hold someone over darkness. All of this happens while Egypt keeps changing outside. Dynasties rise and fall. The river floods and recedes, leaving rich silt, like a promise and like a warning. People marry, argue, count their years, bury their dead, and in the midst of that daily life, the afterlife texts grow. They stretch, they adapt, they become a shared language of hope. But wood has limits. A coffin can only hold so many words. A wealthy family can commission a coffin with writing on every surface, but even then, the space is finite. And not everyone can afford that much labor. Not everyone can afford that many hours of a scribe's hand. So the pressure builds toward another shift, one that feels almost inevitable once you see it. A shift to something lighter, something portable, something that can be rolled, carried, sold, copied, and placed beside the dead like a folded map. In the next part, we will follow the spells from wood to papyrus. We will enter the houses of life, where scribes learn to turn death into chapters. We will smell the ink, the minerals ground into it, the gold dust that made certain words gleam like sunrise. And we will come closer, very gently, to the hall where the heart will be weighed, and where the quiet fear of every soul becomes a single, delicate moment of balance. Before the coffin is closed, there is a moment that feels like the last quiet hour in a house before a long journey. People move around it with careful respect. A bowl of water is set nearby. A lamp is lifted and lowered until the light falls where it needs to, and the dust in that beam drifts like slow snow. Sometimes the coffin floor receives a map, not a traveler's map with simple shorelines, but a diagram meant for a place that can shift. Paths are labeled. Gates are drawn like rectangles with watchful eyes. Names of dangers are written calmly, because calm writing is part of the defense. You can imagine the deceased lying above this map later, separated from it by linen and resin, while the lines beneath him wait like a folded set of instructions. The inner lid often becomes a private ceiling, painted with a sky, small constellations, careful signs, an upward promise inside a wooden box. It is haunting and gentle at the same time, as if the coffin itself is saying, "Your body rests here, but your awareness can still rise," and the spells become strangely focused on one fragile thing, the name. There are lines for not forgetting it in the god's domain, for keeping it from being stolen, for speaking it clearly when memory blurs at the edges. So the texts tell you to recite your mother's name, your father's name, your town, your work, small anchors that keep the self from dissolving into the vast. I picture an apprentice scribe learning all of this by lamplight. He practices the angle of a bird's beak, the curve of a reed leaf, the spacing of signs in a cramped corner where the brush must turn without smearing. He learns which words deserve red ink, because red catches the eye, and the eye needs help in darkness. When his hand cramps, he shakes it out quietly, then returns, listening to the faint drag of pigment on wood, like a whisper being laid down. Outside, dusk gathers along the river. Frogs start their steady calls. Insects click. The air cools. Inside, the lamp flame flickers, and the painted stars on the coffin's lid seem to stir in that movement. Wood can only hold so much, though. Wood has edges. Wood has weight. And as more people reach for protection, the pressure builds towards something lighter, something that can be rolled like a sleeping snake and placed beside the dead like a careful, portable map. In the workshop, the final review feels almost like a small ritual. A master scribe leans close, lamp held low, eyes narrowed until the hieroglyphs become a gentle procession rather than separate marks. He traces along a line with the soft pad of a finger, careful not to lift fresh ink. He stops where a sign seems slightly wrong, and he does not scold loudly. He taps the wood twice, a quiet signal, and the apprentice corrects it with a steady breath, as if tightening a knot on a rope that must not slip. Then the coffin is left open for a while, just to let everything settle. Ink dries, resin scent deepens, silence spreads across the yard, and in that silence you can almost hear the next era arriving. The faint rustle of reeds being cut in the marshes, pressed into sheets, waiting to receive the same old words in a new, more portable skin. Reeds grow where water meets land, and when the wind moves through them, you can hear a dry, soft shiver, as if the marsh itself is whispering. I like to imagine the Egyptians listening to that sound and thinking, yes, this could become a page, something light enough to carry, something thin enough to roll, something that can hold words the way a riverbank holds footprints, briefly but long enough. Papyrus was never just paper to them. It was a plant that had learned to become a surface, a living thing turned into a tool for eternity. If you were standing here with me, we would leave the coffin workshops behind and drift toward a temple complex, the kind that seems to rise out of dust and sunlight, like a thought becoming solid. The outer courtyards are bright, but the rooms deeper inside hold a cooler air, and in that coolness you can smell stone, incense, old wood, and ink. Somewhere within, attached to the temple like a heart hidden in a chest, is the house of life, the Parank, a library, a school, a workshop, a place where knowledge is treated as a substance that must be stored, measured, and guarded. There are shelves where scrolls rest in bundles. There are baskets for old copies and new copies. There are reeds cut into pens, their tips sharpened. There are palettes with black ink and red ink, and sometimes, for the richest commissions, something that glitters faintly when the lamp hits it just right. Gold dust mixed into ink, because gold does not tarnish, and the sun does not forget itself. The shift from writing on coffins to writing on papyrus changed everything. It did not change the hunger, but it changed the shape of the solution. A coffin is a single object, made for a single person. A scroll can be copied. It can be customized. It can be priced by length and ornament. It can travel. And yet papyrus is fragile, too. Moisture, insects, time itself. The scribes knew this, and they did not pretend otherwise. So they learned to prepare better sheets, to press them dense, to laminate layers, to treat the surface as if it needed both craft and blessing. The ink changed as well. Carbon ink was reliable, but for spells meant to last beyond any human calendar, they added minerals, rare powders, substances believed to carry solar and lunar force. In some traditions, the writing itself was treated like a living barrier, not just meaning, but presence. With papyrus came organization. On wood, the spells had to fit where they could. On a scroll, the spells could be arranged like a journey, chapter after chapter, a sequence that made sense to a traveling soul. This is where the Book of the Dead begins to take its recognizable form. The Egyptians called it by different names: the coming forth by day, the chapters of coming forth by day, words that already suggest movement, not confinement. Modern scholars count around 200 spells in the broad tradition, give or take, depending on which versions you include. But individual scrolls rarely held everything. A person chose, a family negotiated, a scribe advised, sometimes gently steering the customer toward what was considered essential, sometimes agreeing to odd requests that reveal private fears. A modest scroll might carry the minimum protections: the words that open doors, the lines that steady the name, the formula that helps the spirit breathe again. A wealthy scroll might unfurl for meters, carrying chapter after chapter, with painted scenes that make the text feel like a world. And that is another shift papyrus allowed: pictures that travel with the words. In Thebes, where Osiris's authority felt close and heavy in the air, scribes and painters made judgment scenes lavish. The hall is drawn with pillars. The gods are shown in their places. The deceased appears small, often with hands raised, as if speaking softly, as if hoping calmness can hold. In Memphis, nearer the old pyramid lands, traditions leaned solar. Older spell versions were prized. Archaic language was kept like a relic, because old words feel weighty, and weight is what you want when you are trying to keep yourself from being blown apart by the unseen. Hermopolis, with its intellectual reputation, favored text, sometimes more words and fewer images, as if clarity itself were the charm. Regional differences did not mean chaos. Not exactly. They meant personality. They meant that the afterlife was imagined through local lenses, and still, across the regions, a common spine held. A soul must be guided. A soul must be protected. A soul must be judged. That last part grows clearer now. The weighing of the heart moves from scattered hints into a central scene, almost unavoidable. It is the moment that makes even the most confident person pause, even if they do not say it aloud. You know that feeling when you are walking toward an appointment you cannot reschedule, and the world keeps going around you, but your mind is already in the room you have not entered yet? That is what this moment feels like. Stretched across centuries, everyone knows it is coming. Everyone prepares for it. Everyone tries to rehearse their own innocence in the quiet of their own mind. The Hall of Two Truths is described as a place of order, not a swamp of shadows, not a maze of knives, but a cosmic courtroom where balance matters. Its floor is solid like the first mound of creation. Its air is bright in a way that does not hurt the eyes, a brightness that feels like honesty. The hall is divided into two halves, mirroring the idea that truth has two faces: the cosmic law of Ma'at and the daily practice of it. Along the hall sit judges, 42 in many versions, each linked to a district, each responsible for a category of behavior. Some names sound like warnings: bone crusher, he who lives on blood. Others sound almost like riddles. But the point is not the name. The point is that nothing is too small to be weighed. Not only the obvious harms, but the subtle ones: cheating in measures, stirring trouble with gossip, disrespecting parents, pretending humility while hoarding pride. At the center stands Anubis. I always picture him not as a monster, but as a careful professional, like a mortician who has seen too much to be dramatic. His jackal head is alert. His hands are steady. He adjusts the scale as if it is delicate glass, as if the slightest tilt could ruin everything. On one side of the scale is the heart, not the organ in the chest, but the essence that remembers. It holds every intention that never became an action. It holds every action that tried to pretend it was nothing. It holds warmth and sting, generosity and envy, patience and impatience, all of it layered like silt after a flood. On the other side is the feather of Ma'at, a simple thing, and that simplicity is what makes it terrifying. It is light. It does not argue. It does not explain. It simply is. Thoth is there too. Ibis-headed, holding a palette, recording the result as if it is a line in a ledger that cannot be disputed. And nearby, waiting in stillness, is a shape no one wants to look at too long. The Devourer, a creature made from the worst parts of familiar predators: crocodile, lion, hippopotamus, built to represent a final kind of erasure, not punishment that continues, but ending that ends. The Egyptians feared oblivion as much as pain, maybe more. They feared being removed from the world's memory, from their own name, from their own story. So the scrolls prepare you. They teach you the negative confession, the declarations of innocence spoken to each judge. They ask you to say, again and again, "I have not done this, I have not done that," until the repetition itself becomes a rhythm, and the rhythm becomes a kind of calm. If you practice enough, perhaps your voice will not tremble. If you memorize enough, perhaps your mind will not go blank. It's debated how literally people expected these words to function. Were they magic that forced the gods to accept you? Or were they a kind of moral training, teaching you how to live so the heart would naturally be light? Maybe they were both. Human beings are rarely satisfied with only one kind of safety. And if the heart balances, if it rests level with the feather, the soul is called true of voice, justified, able to step forward, not because of birth, not because of wealth, but because something in the record of the self has not become too heavy. This is the tender revolution inside the darker one. The old monopoly cracks again, but now it cracks in a way that feels almost hopeful. Any soul can become effective, and if it can pass the balance. Any soul can join the blessed dead if it can keep its name, its memory, its composure. Still, passing the hall is not the end. It is the doorway. Beyond it, the Duat stretches. 12 hours of night. Gateways guarded by beings who demand passwords. Rivers that do not flow like water. Cities where the price of help might be a memory you do not know you can afford to lose. So let the scroll roll closed for a moment. Let the ink settle into the fibers. Let the painted gods rest in their colors. In the next, Bart, we will step past the courtroom's clean light and into the underworld's shifting geography, where even a justified soul must keep walking, softly, carefully, with the river's breath in its ears. Let me slow down there, in the house of life, because places like that are easy to imagine as abstract, and they were anything but. They were rooms where people worked until their shoulders ached, where the air stayed cool even at noon, where the sound of a brush on papyrus could feel as loud as a footstep in a tomb. A master scribe might sit cross-legged on a mat, scroll unrolled across a low table. He moves his reed pen in short strokes, then in longer glides, pausing to dip, pausing to breathe. The ink has a scent, a dry mineral bite beneath the sweetness of gum. When he lifts the pen, a tiny bead forms at the tip, and he touches it to the palette's edge, so it will not blot the next sign. You can hear the quiet tap of that gesture, repeated, until it becomes soothing. An apprentice nearby holds a straight edge, helping keep the columns aligned. Another grinds pigment in a small stone bowl, the grinding sound steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes a painter enters, sleeves rolled, carrying a thin brush that seems almost too delicate to exist. He looks at the blank spaces left in the text for vignettes, and he imagines what will live there. The scales, the gods, the boat, the gates. Then he paints slowly, building a face out of careful lines, building a feather out of patience. When a scroll is meant for a tomb, preservation becomes part of the magic. The best sheets are chosen, pressed tight, their fibers smoothed until your fingertip meets almost no resistance. Some scribes add protective coatings. Some add ritual phrases before they write the first chapter, as if waking the papyrus and asking it to endure. The production can take weeks, sometimes months, depending on how much a family can pay. A master writes the main text, An apprentice adds rubrics, little headings, red ink that guides the reader like lanterns. An artist paints the scenes. Then the scroll returns to the master for review. He checks for missing signs, for a wrong order, for a careless stroke that could change a word. He corrects what he can. He sighs softly when he finds an error that forces a line to be rewritten, because rewriting costs time, and time costs coin, and death is never polite enough to wait. As the tradition grows, scribes begin comparing their spell collections. They travel. They meet at major centers. They lay out reference copies like merchants laying out cloth, pointing to variations, arguing gently about which wording is best, which sequence feels safest. Out of those comparisons come catalogs and numbering systems, ways to say, this is the falcon chapter, and here it belongs, and that is the lotus chapter, and here it belongs. The numbers we use now are modern, but the urge to order the spells, to make them easier to select and copy, was already there. Order again, always order, pushing back the edge of chaos. And even when the ordering becomes more standard, people still choose. A scribe might advise, you should include the chapter that keeps your heart from testifying against you, because yes, that is another quiet fear. That your own heart might speak, might betray you, might become its own witness. So there are spells meant to steady it, to calm it, to ask it not to rise up at the worst moment. It is a strange kind of intimacy, arguing with your own inner record, pleading with it like a stubborn companion. The scroll, once finished, is rolled carefully from one end, the painted scenes protected by thin sheets, tied with linen, placed in a case. It is light enough to carry with one hand. That lightness is part of the new world. Magic can be moved, magic can be stored, magic can be shared, traded, taught, which means the afterlife no longer belongs only to stone. It belongs to ink, to hands, to the quiet industry of people who learned how to package hope without making it loud. Night in ancient Egypt was never truly empty. Even when the last voices faded from the courtyards, even when the cooking fires sank into coals, there was still a kind of movement, a thin stirring in the air, as if the world kept breathing in the dark. And that is a good place to begin the Duat, because the Duat is not simply a pit beneath the earth. It is a parallel world that moves while you move, a landscape that listens, a road that changes its texture under your feet. If you were sitting here with me by the fireplace, I would lower my voice even more for this part, because the Egyptians treated this passage with a certain respect that feels almost like quiet love. They did not deny the danger. They simply refused to scream about it. They wrapped it in ritual, in words, in maps, in steady breathing. So imagine the moment after judgment. The scales have settled. The feather has held its calm. Thoth has written the verdict, as if writing makes the universe obey its own rules. And you, the traveler, are declared true of voice. You might think that would feel like relief. It does, but it is a thin relief, like the first cool sip of water after a long day in the sun. Because immediately after, the hall's bright order falls behind you, and ahead there is a doorway that looks like shadow, pretending to be stone. Honestly, I have always found it strange that the Egyptians did not picture the underworld as a single place. They pictured it as hours, 12 hours. Not because they were obsessed with clocks, but because night itself is a journey, and the sun's journey is the oldest story they trusted. If the sun can travel through darkness and return, then maybe you can too. That is the logic, soft as a hand on your shoulder. The first hour begins at the western edge, where the sun sinks. You arrive not with a dramatic crash, but with a gentle shift, like stepping from a warm room into a cooler corridor. The air changes. It carries the faint smell of river mud and something metallic, like a coin held too long in a palm. In front of you rises a gate. Not a simple door, but a threshold guarded by coiled forms. Serpents, yes, but not the kind that strike at ankles and reeds. These are watchers. Their bodies loop around the gate like living rope, their eyes steady, unblinking, ancient. They do not hiss. They do not need to. Their silence is the question. You have a scroll, or at least the memory of its words, and you begin to speak. Not loudly, never loudly. A password is not a performance. It is a key. You name yourself as one justified. You name a god. You name a hidden title. Your mouth forms syllables you practiced in daylight, syllables you repeated until they felt natural, until they could leave your tongue without shaking. Some traditions offer different passwords. Some priests taught one set, some another. It's debated how uniform this was across Egypt, but the feeling remains the same. You must prove you belong. Knowledge is your passport. Calm is your shield. The serpents shift slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, and the gate opens as if the stone itself exhales. Beyond it, the Duat resembles a version of Egypt seen in twilight, familiar shapes softened and made strange. There are waterways, because the Egyptians could not imagine any meaningful place without a river. But these rivers are not always water. One channel glows faintly, like molten silver flowing beneath a skin of darkness. Another seems to hold liquid fire, a steady illumination that does not warm you, only watches you. Another is pure black, not reflective, not friendly, the kind of black that swallows sound. If a drop touched you, you feel it might take a piece of you with it, not your body, but your coherence. You do not rush. In the Duat, rushing is a way to forget your name, so you move slowly, as if each step is a thought you are placing carefully. Your feet make almost no sound, but you can hear your own breath, and sometimes, faintly, you can hear the river's breath too, a low pulse, like a giant creature sleeping under the current. The second hour brings the first settlements. The word city feels too ordinary, but it is close enough. Structures rise from materials that are not wood or stone in the usual sense. They look like compressed darkness turned into walls, like crystallized starlight stacked into steps. Windows glow without lamps. Doorways feel like they are waiting for a name. You pass through an arch and find a market. Yes, a market. Because even in the afterlife, the Egyptians imagined exchange. There are stalls, and the air carries scents that remind you of life. Bread, beer, sweet herbs, but each scent is altered, as if memory has edited it. A loaf sits on a cloth, and you know it will never spoil. A cup of water catches no dust, and you know it will never run dry. Clothing hangs like pale mist, woven from something that looks like moonlight, light enough to fold, strong enough to resist tearing. You approach with the cautious curiosity of someone walking through a town where you do not know the customs. And the vendors, if that is the right word, look at you with eyes that seem too old. Some are blessed dead. You can feel it, their presence, steady. Others are something else. Not openly hostile, just watchful, as if they are deciding what you are worth. There is no gold here, no silver that matters. In a place where the walls can be made from starlight, earthly wealth is a child's toy, so the payment is different. Knowledge for knowledge, power for power, and sometimes, most unsettling of all, memory for passage. A guide offers you a bundle of provisions and asks, almost casually, for a small memory. Not your name, never that. Not if you are wise. Just a fragment, a scent from your childhood, the feel of your mother's hand when you were small, the sound of rain on a roof, something soft, something you think you can spare. You hesitate. You know that in the Duat, every surrender has weight. You also know that hunger and thirst are not supposed to touch the blessed, but the journey is long, and comfort can become a kind of armor, so you choose carefully. You offer a memory that hurts a little, but not too much. You feel it lift away like dust brushed from fabric. It leaves a blank spot, a quiet hollow, and the vendor nods, satisfied, placing the provisions into your hands. The third hour deepens the sense of disorientation. Paths split. A canal leads left, another right, and both look familiar. This is where the spells that read like travel guides become precious. You recite directions. You name landmarks that are half physical, half symbolic. A tree that grows backward, a stone that hums, a pillar that sweats cold dew. The words do not create the path, exactly. They hold your attention steady enough to recognize it. By the fourth hour, the Duat's landscape becomes less gentle. The air thickens. The darkness feels heavier, as if carrying it costs effort. You arrive at a region the texts describe with a kind of blunt honesty. The Valley of the Knife. It is not a valley in the usual sense. It is a stretch of ground that cannot decide if it wants to be solid. As you step forward, the surface shivers, and blades rise like reeds, thin and sharp, appearing where your foot would land. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to make you stop, to make you understand that the land is paying attention to you. You stand very still. You listen. The only sound is the faint scrape of metal against something unseen, like teeth grinding softly. Your heart tries to speed up, and you slow it with your breath. Inhale, hold, exhale, longer. The spell for this place is not only a set of words, it is a way of becoming less graspable. So you speak the formula that loosens your edges, the one that makes you slightly incorporeal, not invisible, not gone, just less fixed. Your hands feel light, your feet feel like mist. You take one step, and the blade rises too late. You take another, and the ground forgets you for a moment. You move as if you are walking through a dream, where you can pass through walls, but only if you do not doubt yourself. The valley stretches. It is longer than you want it to be. This is where time dilation happens naturally. Each breath becomes an hour. Each step becomes a small prayer. Even if you do not call it that, dust clings to your ankles, though it is not dust from earth. It is dust from abandoned intentions, from lives that reached this place without the right words and left pieces of themselves behind. When you finally reach the far edge, you do not collapse. You do not celebrate. You simply keep going, because stopping in the Duat can be dangerous in its own quiet way. Rest invites attention. The fifth hour brings heat. At first it is distant, like a warm wind that never arrives. Then it becomes a presence, pressing against your skin, making your thoughts feel slow. Ahead, the horizon glows, not with sunrise, but with something fierce, the Lake of Fire. The name sounds dramatic, but the experience is more eerie than loud. It is vast. It stretches beyond what you can see. Its surface churns in slow waves of flame, rising and falling as if the lake is breathing. The light it throws is harsh, but beautiful in a hypnotic way, like watching a hearth from too close. You do not step nearer than you must. You can feel the heat, even at a distance, a heat that does not only threaten the body, but the structure of the spirit. This fire is fed by anger, by condemnation, by the heavy hearts that failed the feather. The texts say it is punishment and barrier both, a place that keeps the deeper regions of the Duat from casual wandering. You stand at the shore and look for the boat. Yes, a boat, because the Egyptians never stopped believing that the right vessel could carry you across the worst water. Somewhere along the edge, a shape moves, not a shadow, not a person, but an operator of passage, a ferryman, ancient, patient, not kind in any sentimental way, but not cruel either. He is simply part of the system. You take a step, and the air shivers. The ferryman turns his head. His eyes reflect the fire like wet stones. He waits for you to speak. This password is longer, more complicated. It is meant to prove not just knowledge, but alignment. You do not say, I deserve this. You say, I am connected to order. I know names. I bear the seal of truth. I come without deception. You begin. Your voice is steady, and you try not to think about what happens if it is not steady. You try not to glance at the flames licking the shore like curious tongues. You focus on the syllables. You let them fall in a calm sequence, like beads sliding along a string. And when you finish, the ferryman does not respond with words. He lowers a plank. The boat waits. Its hull, made of materials the mind cannot quite name. Bone, wood, a suggestion of scales, a hint of phoenix feather in the sail. It smells faintly of resin and smoke, and something sweet, like a dried flower. You step aboard slowly. The boat rocks once, then settles. You sit. Your hands rest on your knees. You breathe. The lake's breath rises around you in waves of heat and light. In the next part, we will cross. We will enter the deeper hours where identity can blur, where the cavern of the ancient falcon god hums like a sleeping throat, and where the serpent of chaos waits in a darkness so deep it feels like the beginning of time. For now, let the boat drift a little, the firelight flickering on the water, the air thick with warmth, and your mind quiet enough to hear your own name holding steady inside you. Before the boat truly leaves the shore, there is a pause that feels like an unwritten spell. The ferryman dislikes haste. The lake does too. You rest your fingertips on the hull and feel shallow grooves, symbols worn smooth by many crossings. Touching them is like touching sound. It reminds you how words can become tools. The sail hangs slack, then flutters, once in the heat shimmer, a soft linen noise that steadies you. When a quiet fear tries to rise, you answer it the old way, with attention. You watch a wave of flame lift and fold. You listen for the faint hiss where fire meets air. You breathe out longer than you breathe in. The shore recedes by the width of a breath. The pole dips without a splash, and you allow yourself to be carried a little farther while your name stays clear inside you. Somewhere behind you, the Hall of Two Truths feels like a candle left in another room. Ahead, the lake's bright darkness opens like a page being turned. You keep your shoulders loose, your hands warm, your thoughts simple, one sentence at a time, one breath at a time. If sleep is near for you right now, let this be the moment you lean into it. Imagine the boat rocking so gently you can barely measure it. Imagine the firelight moving like slow water. Imagine your eyelids growing pleasantly heavy, not from fear, but from the steady rhythm of travel. The boat carries you toward the lake's center, and the light grows strange. It is bright, but it does not feel like day. It feels like the inside of a closed eyelid. When a candle is too close, a warm glow pressed against darkness. The ferryman does not speak. His silence is not rude. It is professional, like a priest who knows that talking can break concentration. You listen to the soft creak of the hull, the faint flutter of the sail, the steady dip of the pole. There is no splash. Even the lake seems to swallow its own sound. As the heat thickens, you sense that this fire is not only temperature. It is a kind of judgment continuing in another form. Not the organized judgment of Ma'at's hall, but consequence, energy, the residue of heavy hearts. The texts say condemned spirits feed it. I do not know if that is literal. It may be metaphor made vivid. Either way, you feel the lake's mood, impatient, hungry, yet contained by rules older than your fear. A wave rises nearby, a slow wall of flame. It curls like a hand, and then falls back with a sigh that you feel more than hear. The boat tilts, settles. You keep your breathing even. You keep your jaw soft. You do not stare too long at any single flare, because you can almost imagine the shapes inside it, and imagination can be a doorway. Halfway across, the ferryman lifts the pole and holds it in the air. For a moment the boat drifts without guidance. The sail trembles. The heat presses closer, and you realize This is the moment for the next words. Not a password, not a plea, a statement of alignment, a reminder to the Duat itself that you are not here by accident. So you speak quietly, and the syllables fall into the firelight like cool stones. You name the sun as it rises. You name truth as it balances. You name the record keeper who does not forget. You do it slowly, without urgency, as if you are telling your own mind where to stand. The ferryman lowers the pole again. The boat answers with forward motion. The lake's center begins to pass behind you. In the distance, the opposite shore appears, not as solid land at first, but as a darker band where the flames lose some of their height. The air cools by a small degree, enough to feel like mercy. When the hull finally kisses the far edge, it does not scrape. It simply arrives. The ferryman sets the pole aside. He nods once, a minimal gesture that says, "You have done what you were supposed to do." Then he turns the boat back toward the lake, already preparing for someone else's crossing. Because in this world, the work never ends. You step onto the ground and feel it accept your weight. Your feet are steady again. The heat remains behind you like a distant furnace. Ahead, the Duat deepens. This is the 6th hour, and the landscape changes from open hazard to enclosed mystery. The air smells of stone and old dust, a kind of dust that has been waiting a very long time. There is a mouth in the earth, a cavern entrance. Not jagged, not dramatic, just an opening that seems to inhale and exhale slowly, as if the underworld has lungs. The Egyptians called this domain by the name of an ancient falcon god, Saqqara. Some texts paint him as mummified, bandaged, quiet. Not a friendly guide, not a villain either. More like a force that predates your personal story. A keeper of thresholds where identity can thin. You step into the cavern, and the temperature drops. Not cold, but cool enough to make your skin tighten slightly. The walls feel alive in a subtle way. They do not move, but they hum, a low vibration like a distant drum heard through rock. Your breath makes a small sound here. It echoes and returns changed, as if the cavern has tasted it. This is where the danger is not blades or flame. It is forgetting. The texts describe it plainly. The rock can drink memory. The air can soften the edges of who you are. It is like walking through fog that wants to erase your footprints, and then, if you stay too long, erase the foot that made them. So you do what the spells advise. You recite your own name, not once, but again and again. You speak your mother's name, your father's, a title you held in life, a place you loved, a small truth about yourself that feels solid. You are not boasting. You are anchoring. As you speak, you imagine each word as a knot tied in a rope. The rope stretches behind you toward the world of the living, toward the tomb, toward the quiet room where your body rests. You do not pull on the rope. You simply keep it from unraveling. Sometimes the cavern offers distractions, a side passage that glows faintly, a chamber where the hum becomes a song, a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting your face, but the reflection is slightly wrong. The eyes too old, the mouth too calm. If you looked too long, you might accept that wrong face, and then it would become yours. You look away. You focus on the path. You listen for your own footsteps, a soft scuff, a whisper of sand. You keep your pace slow. You keep your mind quieter than your fear. When you exit Saqqara's cavern, you do not feel triumphant. You feel intact, and that is enough. The 7th hour arrives like a deepening of night. The Duat's air grows thinner, as if reality itself is becoming delicate. There is a sense of approaching something enormous, not a monster exactly, but an event. A confrontation that happens every night, whether you are here or not. This is the region where the sun's bark fights the serpent of chaos, Apophis. The Egyptians sometimes called him the one who wants to unmake. a coil of negation, a hunger for the world to return to silence. You do not see the serpent all at once. At first, you notice absence, a place where light refuses to go, a gap in the landscape that feels like a wound. Then you sense movement inside that absence, slow and vast, like continents shifting. The sun's bark approaches. It is not a simple boat. It is an idea made visible, a vessel of gold that does not tarnish, a prow shaped like command. The gods are there, in their roles, steady as ritual, and there are places for the justified dead, places for souls who have passed the feather and kept their names. Some scholars argue that this is symbolic, a way of saying the blessed participate in maintaining order. Maybe, but symbols can still be experienced. So you step nearer to the bark and feel the air tremble, as if the universe is holding its breath. You add your presence to the crew, not with shouting, with intention. You repeat a spell that aligns you with the forces of balance. You imagine your breath as a small wind filling the sail. You imagine your steady heart as a weight that keeps the boat from tipping toward chaos. Apophis rises, not in a dramatic leap, but in a slow emergence, the way a nightmare becomes clear over time. His scales seem to absorb the firelight. His eyes hold no curiosity, only refusal. He wants the sun to stop. He wants the cycle to break. He wants the river to run backward into nothing. The battle is not described as blood and gore in the texts I want to linger with tonight. Instead, think of it as pressure. The serpent presses against reality. The gods push back with words, with names, with the creative force the Egyptians called Heka. Heka is not just magic tricks. It is the idea that properly spoken words can shape the, quote, world, that the first creation happened through voice. So now, in the deepest hour, voices are weapons, not loud, but exact. You speak too. You do not need to be powerful like a god. You only need to be precise like a scribe. You pronounce a name correctly. You hold a phrase in the right order. You become, for a moment, a small instrument of creation rather than destruction. The air warps. Time stutters. For a second, you feel your memories try to rewind, like a scroll being rolled the wrong way. You resist by returning to a simple image. Candlelight, a steady flame, a room that is safe, a breath that keeps moving forward. The bark shudders, then steadies. Apophis recoils, not defeated forever, but pushed back for tonight, which is all the cosmos ever promises. The sun continues its journey. Order survives another cycle, and you, carried along in that survival, enter the 8th hour with a kind of exhausted quiet. The Duat does not get kinder, but you have learned something. Danger can be met with stillness. Ahead, there will be more gates, more names, more transformations. The spells offer shapes to borrow when the path demands it. Falcon wings for height, lotus petals for concealment, the rare fire of the Bennu for cleansing. You will need them soon. For now, let the aftershock of the cosmic battle fade like ripples on a dark river, and let your mind settle, heavy in the best way, as if sleep itself is a protective charm wrapped gently around your thoughts. On the way to Saqqara's cavern, the passage narrows until your shoulders almost brush stone. The rock is cool and chalk dry, and the air tastes faintly of old incense and river fog. Each exhale returns to you as a softer echo, like the underworld copying your breathing. Inside, the danger becomes quiet and personal, forgetting. So you repeat the anchors, your name, your mother's, your father's, a place you loved, the small truth you can hold without effort. If you stumble, you begin again. No shame, only persistence. A still pool appears once, mirror smooth. Your reflection flickers between versions of you, younger, older, and one that does not belong. You look away before it can settle. You speak your name again, and the cavern's hum eases, as if it is disappointed it did not get to rewrite you. When you step out of Saqqara's domain, the air feels thinner, and the approach to Apophis feels like approaching an absence. Chaos does not always roar. Sometimes it confuses. A ridge shifts beside you. A canal seems to flow in a circle, and your thoughts try to follow the wrong current. That is, when you remember the rule that runs through every spell. Names create boundaries. You speak the names of the gods on the solar bark with careful respect, because mispronouncing a name is like turning a key the wrong way. You let your breath lengthen. You keep your mouth soft. And when the serpent's darkness presses close, you hold on to small realities. Warmth in your palm, weight in your foot, the steady rhythm of air leaving your nose. Order survives another night, not by force, but by attention. After the bark passes the darkest seam, the world does not snap back at once. It relaxes, gradually, like a fist opening one finger at a time. The light becomes warmer. The air stops tasting metallic. The ground feels less argumentative beneath your feet. This is when the idea of Heka becomes easier to feel. Not as fireworks, not as spectacle, but as a practical current that runs under everything, the way the Nile runs under the fields even when you cannot see it from a distance. Heka is the reason a spell is not merely poetry. It is the reason a name is not merely a label. Words, in this worldview, are tools that shape the edges of reality. I think that is why the Egyptians wrote so obsessively, carving spells into pyramid walls, painting them inside coffins, rolling them onto papyrus. It was a way of insisting that the world could be held together by language, a kind of stubborn hope. And in the Duat, hope behaves like engineering. It becomes structure. You notice it in the smallest things. A gate that would have remained sealed opens when you name its guardian correctly. A hostile spirit hesitates when you speak its secret title with confidence. A path that tries to twist backwards straightens when you repeat the sentence that keeps your mind facing forward. This is also when you begin preparing for the art of becoming other shapes without losing yourself. The texts offer many forms, each one a solution to a different problem. If the Duat demands height, you borrow falcon wings. If it demands concealment in water, you become a lotus drifting on a dark canal. If corruption clings to you like smoke, some traditions whisper of the Bennu, a bird of renewal whose fire cleanses, though it is risky, and not every soul would dare it. Preparation starts small. You picture a feather-light shift in your shoulders, as if they could lift. You picture the slow opening and closing of petals, patient and rhythmic. You picture fire that warms without burning, fire that purifies without consuming. You do not force the images. You let them arrive like dreams arriving at the edge of sleep, because the later hours will test you in subtler ways. There are beings who approach as helpers and feed like parasites, the so-called eaters of blood, spirits who drain strength with a friendly touch. There are backward-walking souls who move against time, trying to fold you into repetition until you lose the will to continue. And there are always more gates, always more watchers, each one requiring a different phrase, a different angle of truth. So you slow down here, in the calmer wake of the cosmic battle. You let your breathing settle into a steady tide. You let the firelight of the bark feel almost like the fireplace beside us. And you keep the simplest vow of all. I will remember my name. I will move forward. I will let the darkness be dark, and still keep my inner room quiet. The 8th hour has passed, and the Duat feels as if it has taken something from you without asking. Not a limb, not breath, not even courage. Something quieter, the extra noise of being alive. Now the 9th hour opens, and the world ahead is shaped by thin rules, by thresholds that are more like ideas than places. You move through a corridor of shadow that smells faintly of linen and clay, as if every tomb in Egypt has exhaled at once. The ground beneath your feet is firm, then soft, then firm again. like packed river silt that remembers both flood and drought. If you were standing here with me, I think you would notice how the Duat changes its sound. Sometimes it rings, like stone tapped with a fingernail. Sometimes it swallows every echo. Tonight, it does both, alternating in a rhythm that makes your thoughts slow down. It is almost kind, almost. This is when the texts begin to speak less about great battles and more about the smaller predators that thrive in aftermath. The ones that do not confront a soul head-on because they do not need to. They wait for relief. They wait for exhaustion. They wait for that soft, dangerous moment when you think the worst has already happened. You come to a plain that stretches toward the eastern side of the underworld. The light is dim here, not the harsh glow of fire, but a bluish murmur, like moonlight seen through thin dust. In the distance you can make out figures moving, slow and uncertain, like travelers who are half asleep. At first, one of them approaches you. A person-shaped silhouette, shoulders rounded, hands empty. It seems harmless. It even seems familiar, like someone you might have passed in a market in life. And that is the trap. Some scrolls call them eaters of blood. I think of it as a name for a certain kind of hunger, not for flesh, not for pain, for your essence, for your forward momentum, for the clean strength that carried you through knives and fire. They do it gently, almost politely. That is what makes it unsettling. The figure steps close, and you notice the smallest wrong detail. Its shadow does not fall where it should. Its eyes, when the bluish light brushes them, look too bright, too thirsty, like damp stones in a riverbed, reflecting a lantern. It offers you a hand, palm up, as if to steady you. It says nothing. It does not need words to offer comfort. You pause. You breathe. You remember the rule that runs through every chapter. Do not accept what you have not named. So you do not take the hand. Instead, you speak a short protective phrase, not shouted, not dramatic, just precise. A sentence that draws a line around you. You imagine it as chalk on stone, as a ring of salt, as a bandage wrapped snugly around your identity. The figure hesitates. For a moment, its calm mask slips, and you sense the hunger underneath, patient and ancient. Then it drifts away, as if it never existed. But your skin tingles where its presence brushed the air, and you understand that this plane is full of such things. Soft dangers, quiet theft. You keep moving. Your steps are measured. Your shoulders remain loose, your jaw unclenched. You let your arms hang heavy in the good way, the way they do when sleep is close. Soon another traveler appears, walking toward you. This one is stranger. It moves backward, not stumbling, not confused, deliberate. Its feet place themselves behind it with uncanny accuracy, while its face remains turned in your direction, watching you as it retreats. The effect makes your mind want to tilt, like a boat pulled by a hidden current. The texts speak of backward-walking spirits, souls that once moved forward but became twisted, reversed. They do not scream. They do not attack with claws. They distort time. They fold your path into a loop. As you watch, the world around the backward walker feels briefly unstable. A distant gate seems to slide farther away. A ridge of earth appears where you are sure there was a canal. For an instant, you feel yourself almost stepping in. Place, the same breath repeating. You slow down even more. You focus on the most basic things. The warmth of air leaving your nose. The faint grit of dust under your heel. The candlelight you keep in your imagination like a small private lantern. You say your name, and then you say it again. You say it without anger, without fear, as if you are simply reminding the universe of a fact. The backward walker pauses. It tilts its head. It seems to listen, not with ears, but with the emptiness inside it. Then it moves away, still backward, still watching, slipping into the dimness where time feels too thin to trust. You pass a set of low mounds. and you notice objects half buried in the sand. Small amulets, pieces of crafted protection, left behind by others. Some are shaped like eyes, some like little columns, some like tiny boats. They glitter faintly, as if the Duat itself has sprinkled them with starlight. Honestly, I have always found it strange and comforting that even here, in the afterlife, someone thought to carry a spare charm, a little weight against uncertainty. You select one carefully, not greedily. You hold it in your palm and feel its coolness. You imagine it not as a magical gadget, but as a promise. I will not be pushed backward. I will not be drained by false kindness. I will keep moving. The 10th hour brings you to another gate, and the gate is guarded. Not by serpents this time, but by beings whose forms shift between human and animal, as if they cannot decide what kind of story they belong to. One has the calm head of an ibis and hands that look like careful tools. Another has the heavy jawline of a crocodile, but eyes that are almost tired. A third seems made of lion strength and bird alertness in one body, a composite of vigilance. They do not move aside until you speak the correct words, not only names, origins, functions. You tell them what they are, not in insult, in recognition. That is the strange power of this system. To pass a guardian, you do not flatter it. You understand it. You prove you know its place in the architecture of night. And so you speak, and the gate opens. Beyond it, the path narrows into the eastern approach. You can feel dawn somewhere far off, not as light yet, but as a loosening in the air, a lessening of pressure. This is when temptation arrives in its most convincing form. A figure appears ahead, holding what looks like a lamp. Its flame is gentle, warm, comforting. It turns and gestures for you to follow. You almost do, because the lamp reminds you of home, of the safe room, of the fire beside us. You know that feeling when something familiar appears at the exact moment you are tired, and you want to trust it simply because you want to stop thinking. You pause and breathe. You ask for the figure's name, silently, at first, then, with your voice. The figure does not answer. Its lamp flickers. The flame leans toward you, as if it wants to taste your face. You speak a binding phrase you learned, the one that requires precision. You call the figure by a title that reveals it, a hidden name that strips away disguise. The lamp dies. The figure dissolves like smoke, and in the brief darkness that follows, you feel a quiet steadiness settle in your chest. Not triumph, just alignment. The 11th hour is softer. The underworld seems to run out of spectacle and turns to subtle pressure, like a hand on your back that wants to push you off balance. You sense other souls nearby, some moving forward like you, careful and slow, some stuck in confusion, repeating short phrases, forgetting what they were supposed to say. You want to help them. You also know that helping can be dangerous here, because the wrong soul might not be a soul at all. So you offer help the safest way, with a prayer-like breath, with a whispered sentence that is not attached to any one person. May your name stay clear. May your feet move forward. May truth keep its balance. By the time the 12th hour begins, the air has changed. It is still dark, but it is a dark that thins like ink diluted with water. You can smell something like wet reeds and fresh grain, a scent that belongs to life. The path ahead widens. The horizon seems less hostile. You have reached the threshold of the fields of reeds, Sechet Aru, the place described as agricultural paradise, not in childish fantasy, but in the practical language of people who understood that peace means full granaries and calm canals. You step forward, and the ground becomes soft and fertile under your feet. Not mud, not sand, a rich loam that yields gently like a mattress of earth. The air is cooler, the light is pale gold, and the silence here is different from the silence of threat. It is a silence of completion. Ahead you see canals, water that does not burn, water that reflects without distortion. You see barley that stands tall, higher than a person, swaying in a breeze that feels like a god breathing quietly. You see wheat rising like a forest, 7 cubits high in the old measurements, a mythic abundance that makes your shoulders relax. You take a few more steps, and each one feels like it has been waiting for you for a very long time. The stalks brush your sleeves, whispering against linen. Tiny seeds tap softly at your knuckles, as if greeting you with small, dry kisses. A bird calls somewhere, a single note, then another, then silence again. Not the sharp call of danger, more like a signal that time is moving normally here. You reach the edge of a canal and crouch beside it. Your knees creak, the way they would in life, and you smile at that detail. The water is clear enough to show the sandy bottom, the way sunlight would reveal it on a quiet morning. You dip your fingers in, cool, not cold. The chill travels up your arm and smooths out the last rough edges of fear. On the opposite bank, a small boat waits, tied to a post. It is simple, made of reed bundles bound tightly, yet it holds itself with dignity. A ferryman sits inside, face half hidden by shadow from a hood. He does not speak right away. He watches you, as if he is weighing, not your heart, but your patience. So you offer the words of passage, not hurried, not pleading, just steady. The ferryman nods once. The rope loosens. The boat drifts closer with a sound like silk sliding over wood. When you step in, the boat rocks gently and then settles. Your weight is accepted. The ferryman pushes off with a pole, and the pole sinks into the canal bed with a soft shh, like a broom sweeping a stone floor. You glide forward, slow enough to watch the ripples widen, slow enough to notice how each ripple becomes a ring, then fades. As you cross, the fields open wider, and you can see the lines of cultivation stretching in perfect order. There is no panic in this order. It is the kind of arrangement that lets a mind rest, because nothing is about to fall apart. The wind moves through the reeds in long breaths, and you find your own breath matching it without effort. The far bank approaches. You step out. The ferryman does not ask for gold. He does not ask for a name. He simply watches you walk on, as if his work is to keep motion possible, nothing more. In the next part, we will walk deeper into this calm land and learn how even eternity was given, helpers made of clay and spellwork, so the soul could rest without becoming idle. For now, you stand at the edge of the fields, and the wind moves through the grain like a lullaby you do not need to understand to feel. A narrow footpath leads you between the crops. You follow it, letting your feet find their own pace, slow and unforced. Each step presses a soft print into the soil, and the soil rises back again, as if it refuses to keep evidence against anyone. You pass a small cluster of lotus pools. The petals are open, even though the light is still early, still cautious. Their fragrance drifts toward you, clean and faintly sweet, like water that has been sitting in a cool stone jar. You lean over one pool and watch your reflection. It does not ripple into strange shapes. It stays honest. That alone feels like a reward. Farther on, you notice tiny figures standing in neat rows beside a field boundary. Little mummy-form shapes, blue-green like glazed stone, each with a face that is calm and blank. Shabti, servants made for eternity. They are not moving yet. They are waiting, as if listening for a name to be spoken. You do not feel threatened by them. You feel something closer to relief, because the Egyptians understood a quiet truth. Even in paradise, work can become heavy if it never ends. So they built small helpers, and they wrote commands on their bodies, and they trusted that a spell could take the dull weight off the soul's shoulders. A breeze moves through the barley and makes a soft shiver run across the field, like goose flesh on the earth. You stand still and let it pass through you, too. Your breath slows. Your tongue rests in your mouth. Your shoulders drop another fraction. Somewhere beyond the reeds, you sense a larger river, the celestial Nile, and beyond that, a sky that is brighter than this one, waiting for the sun to be born again. That is where the solar bark will travel, and some of the blessed will join it, taking their places among the crew as if they had always belonged there. We will get there, gently, no rushing, just one calm step at a time, through water and grain and candlelit memory. The fields of reeds do not shout their perfection. They do not try to impress you. They simply continue, calm and complete, like a story that has already been told so many times it no longer needs to prove itself. You walk deeper into Sechet Aru, and the air feels different against your skin. On the far side of danger, even the smallest sensations seem gentle. A faint coolness at the back of your neck, the soft drag of fabric against your wrist, the sound of your own breath, steady, unhurried, like a quiet animal sleeping nearby. The fields are laid out with a kind of patient intelligence. Paths run between crops in straight lines, then curve just enough to follow water. Canals cross like threads in a loom. Every crossing has a place to step, a stone, a plank, a firm ridge of packed earth. Nothing surprises you here. And after what you have crossed, that absence of surprise feels like the sweetest thing. You come upon a village. Not large, a handful of houses built from materials that look familiar and yet too perfect to be mortal. Bricks that do not crumble, plaster that does not flake, wood that does not warp. A doorway stands open, and from within comes the smell of baked grain. Not smoke and struggle, just warmth. You hesitate at the threshold, the way you might in life when entering a home that is not yours. Then you remember the logic of this realm. If you have been weighed, if you have been found true, then you are not a visitor. You are an inhabitant. You step inside. The floor is cool under your feet. The room is simple, clean, and quiet, as if it has been waiting without impatience. A low table rests in the center. A jar of water sits beside it, beaded with dew that does not melt. You lift the jar and drink. The water is clear and calm. It does not flood your throat. It seems to spread through you slowly, like a kind thought. Outside, you hear voices, people talking as if nothing terrible ever happened. A laugh, soft and brief. A child calling a name, and then being answered. It makes your chest loosen in a way you did not realize it was still holding. Honestly, I have always found it moving that the Egyptian paradise is not made of clouds and abstract light. It is made of the Nile Valley, corrected, familiar life, repaired, farming without famine, work without fear, order without cruelty. And yes, there is work here. The texts are clear about that. They imagine eternity as a continuation of what mattered in life. Planting, harvesting, writing, crafting, keeping accounts, sharing meals, walking beside water. A strange comfort, maybe. A promise that you will not become a floating thought with nothing to do. You will remain yourself with hands and habits and small daily rhythms. You leave the house and follow a path toward the edge of a field where the soil is darker, richer. A plow rests nearby. It looks heavy, but when you touch it, it feels light, as if the world itself wants to help you. A group of Shabdi figures stand in rows, close enough now for you to see the inscriptions on their bodies. Tiny lines, careful signs, words made into instructions. Some scholars argue about how common these figures were, how many were owned by whom, how the numbers changed over time. But the idea is steady. Little servants, made to respond when the blessed dead are called to labor. A spell that turns repetition into ease. You pick up one shabti and turn it in your palm. It is cool, smooth, like river stone. Its face is blank, not because it is empty, but because it is not meant to be a person. It is meant to be a function. You set it down again and watch. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, as if a bell has rung in a room you cannot see, the shabti straightens. Not with jerkiness, with quiet obedience. It steps forward, carrying its miniature tools as if they are full-sized in its own understanding. More figures stir. A small army of calm helpers. They move toward the field, and as they move, the soil seems to welcome them, opening, then closing, as if the earth is breathing. The plow lines appear behind them, straight and even, without strain. You feel something inside you soften, because the afterlife, in this imagination, is not only reward, it is also design. A thoughtful system built to prevent weariness. You walk along the canal and watch the shabti at work. They do not chatter. They do not complain. They do not hurry. Their movements are steady, like a clock that does not tick loudly. They are the opposite of chaos. Across the water, you see barley rising in waves. In the eastern plots, the stalks are said to reach 4 cubits high, and here it does feel like standing beside a golden wall. In the western plots, the wheat reaches higher still, 7 cubits, and when the wind passes through it, the tops sway out of sight. Like the ceiling of a quiet cathedral, you lean your hand against the grain and feel the tiny vibrations of stems moving together. It is a soft sensation, almost like the purring of a sleeping animal, but made of plants and air. You close your eyes for a moment. You hear the canals. You hear your breath. You hear nothing threatening. When you open your eyes again, you notice a small shrine at the edge of the village. Not grand, not intimidating. A simple stone platform with offerings arranged neatly. Bread, a cup of water, a few flowers, and behind it, a painted image of Osiris, green-skinned, wrapped in white, holding his crook and flail, not as a monster, not as a tyrant, as a steady judge, a king who knows what it is to be broken and still continue. You stand before the shrine and feel, very faintly, the echo of the Hall of Two Truths, not the terror of it, the clarity, the sense that truth is not meant to crush you, but to balance you. Nearby, you see a figure that looks like Anubis. Or perhaps it is a priest's imagination made visible here, a symbol walking on 2 legs, black fur, upright ears, hands that know how to handle delicate things. He does not speak. He does not need to. His presence is like a hand on your shoulder that says, you are safe enough now to stop bracing. You think about how all of this began in stone, in a sealed chamber beneath the sands, a torch flickering in an archaeologist's hand, walls covered in columns of carved words. Those earliest spells were for kings, for Unas, and then for the others who followed, each adding to the library, each trusting that written speech could keep a soul intact. It is debated exactly how the spells were chosen, how they were performed, how priests corrected mistakes, how many versions existed at once. But the feeling behind them is plain: fear of dissolution, and the desire to shape fear into method. Then the method spread. Old Kingdom's certainty cracked, and the monopoly broke. Coffins began to carry the words that once belonged only to pyramids. The dead moved from stone chambers to wooden boxes that became little traveling universes. Names of ordinary officials replaced the names of pharaohs, as if writing could lift a person into divinity by sheer insistence. And later, the words became portable. Papyrus replaced wood, ink replaced chisel. Houses of life copied, edited, arranged. Some workshops preferred solar theology. Some leaned toward Osiris and judgment. Some filled their scrolls with images, lavish and bright, while others kept things bare and scholarly. People chose what they could afford: a few chapters, dozens, hundreds, a menu of protection for the long night. You walk through Seshet Aru thinking about that, how the most unsettling part of this history is not the monsters, not the knives, not the lake of fire. It is the way a society can change its idea of who deserves protection, how quickly privilege can become a template, how slowly it becomes shared, how the need for safety in the face of death can turn into an industry, into a market, into a normal part of life. You follow another path, and the fields begin to slope gently upward toward a rise where the sky looks brighter. A pale band of light gathers there, as if dawn is collecting itself. This is where the texts invite the blessed to join the solar bark. Thus not everyone does. Some remain in the fields, content with agriculture, family, quiet. Others feel the pull of cosmic duty, the desire to participate in keeping order alive. You come to a landing by a wide canal, broader than the others, with water that seems to glow from within. A boat waits there, far grander than the reed craft you crossed earlier. Its hull looks like polished gold that never tarnishes. Its timbers feel like cedar without splinters, as if the tree of life has offered its heart willingly. The air around it hums, faintly, like a deep note held softly. Figures stand on the bank, some with the calm focus of scribes, some with the balanced posture of soldiers who are no longer afraid, some with the patient hands of farmers who understand cycles. They look at the boat with respect, not worship, as if joining it is simply another kind of work, another kind of rhythm. A presence moves at the prow. Re, perhaps, or the idea of Re, the sun as a being who must travel, who must fight, who must rise again. It is hard to look at directly, not because it burns, because it is too familiar, because you have seen it every morning of your life. You remember the battle in the deepest hours, the serpent of chaos, Apophis, coiling around reality, trying to swallow the light. The texts make the battle sound enormous, and maybe it was, in the imagination of those who wrote them. But I also think of the battle as something internal, the nightly struggle not to be pulled back into darkness, not to be undone by exhaustion and fear. Here, at the edge of the fields of reeds, the battle feels less like violence and more like maintenance, keeping the world from collapsing, keeping the river flowing, keeping names remembered. You do not have to board the solar bark. You can simply stand and watch, listening to the water lap at the bank. You can feel the breeze on your face. You can let your eyelids grow heavy. The Duat has already taught you enough. Still, you take a step closer, just to see, just to feel the polished wood under your fingertips, just to hear the quiet creak of rope, the soft clink of something ceremonial. And then, without fanfare, you realize that this is what the Egyptians were doing with their spells. They were building ways to keep moving, ways to avoid being devoured, not only by monsters, but by forgetting, ways to turn dread into a list of instructions, a set of names, a rhythm of breath. In the living world, those texts survived because someone carved them carefully, someone copied them carefully, someone checked them carefully. A whole chain of hands, lit by lamps, working in dusty rooms, believing that accuracy mattered because it held a soul together. Even if you do not believe in the Duat as a literal place, you can feel the tenderness in that labor. You can imagine the scribes, bent over papyrus, dipping their brushes into ink, pausing to blow gently on a line so it dries cleanly. You can imagine the proofreaders, murmuring over each sign, correcting a stroke, because a mistake would not only be an error, it would be a crack, a loose stone in the path. And you can imagine the families, saving what they could, choosing which chapters to include, which images to commission, which amulets to buy, all for the same quiet reason, so that when the night comes, the one they love will not be alone without words. Here, in the fields of reeds, the night is past, the air is brightening, the grain continues to sway, the shabti continue to work in their patient lines, the water continues to whisper, the sky continues to open, So let your breath slow let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts become as light as the feather that balanced the heart. If sleep is already close, you do not need to hold on to the story tightly. You can let it drift, like a small boat sliding along a quiet canal, leaving only rings of ripples behind. And if you find yourself back in that dim room with me, the fireplace low, candlelight trembling, remember this feeling of order without harshness. Remember that even the darkest myths were sometimes written to soothe, to guide, to keep the mind from spinning into chaos. Let the sound of the river, real or imagined, carry you towards stillness. Let the dust settle. Let the old words fade into a hum. One more slow breath, in through the nose, as if you are smelling warm bread and clean water, out through the mouth, as if you are cooling a lamp flame so it burns steady. You can feel your face soften, the tiny muscles around the eyes letting go. The bark, the fields, the guardians, the careful names, they can all rest now, safely stored in the quiet part of your mind. Good night.